Welcome to Here is Where We Meet, an original podcast series produced by Tank.
I'm Michael Morris.
And I'm James Lingwood, and you're listening to Here is Where We Meet, a series of conversations with just a few of the artists we worked with across 3 decades as co-directors of Art Angel, producing extraordinary art in particular places across London, the UK, and beyond.
Today, we're joined by Jeremy Deller, with whom Art Angel produced the Battle of Orgreave in 2001. It was an audacious restaging of the infamous confrontation between miners and mounted police in South Yorkshire during the 1984 miners' strike. Let's begin with a question I don't think either of us have ever asked you.
Right.
Which is, when did you realise you were an artist?
I do get asked that.
We have never asked.
Oh, you've never asked me that?
We've never asked you that.
Well, I mean, I realised that I was an artist when I had to put that word down on my... I was entering America once in sort of 1996 or 97 or something.
Yeah.
I had to actually say what I was and be sincere about it. And that was when I was entering the US at some point in the 90s. Because I had to say something, otherwise it'd sort of turn you back.
How old were you then?
30-something, 31 or 2. So that was probably the first time I had to write it down, so I had to sort of say it as well to someone.
So do the immigration people then ask you, what kind of artist are you?
Yes, because when you say that, they assume, well, not assume, they think you might be a musician.
Yes, it's
so then you have
money.
Then you have to qualify it, and they said, so what kind of things do you do? Do you paintings? Well, not really, and then it can get slightly complicated. So it depends on who you get there.
So it took you a while to recognise you were an artist, but for the decade before then, you were generating ideas. Just tell us a little bit about how you worked and how you work now.
Well, I didn't go to art college. I lived at home. I was in sort of full part-time and unemployment at different stages. It was a mix of things, and I was taking photographs and trying to work things out in my head. And then I did a course at the London College of Printing, which is now called the London College of Communication, where they let people on low income or just people who had retired use the silkscreen studio for like 2 days a week, for more or less for free, with all the facilities, but also all the ink and the paper. Probably because no one was doing it at that time. It wasn't seen as a good thing, a cool thing to do, or whatever. This is mid to late 90s. And so I started making prints. So I was making work on paper, basically, in little interventions. And so it was small-scale, cheap work.
So was that when you made the poster called The English Civil War Part 2?
Yes, it was. I made that on an Apple Mac. So I was making a series of exhibition posters, silk screens of exhibition posters that could happen, or I felt might happen, or I thought were humorous, like a David Bowie retrospective and a Joy Division New Order exhibition and a show about rave culture and an exhibition called World of Gaza.
But you had no intention of actually making the exhibition?
No, I didn't.
Promoting?
I didn't. I wrote press releases for some of them and sent them out to people, but it was just speculative exhibition making. Those 4 exhibitions have since been made.
I was going to say, you were ahead of your time then.
Well, yes, in a way I was. And then I made another one. I made at the London College of Printing, as it was. They had a locked room, more or less, that had 12 computers in it. And you could go and have a go on an Apple Mac. They're like little towers, and they were tiny screens. And I started doing work on those.
So, where are you generating the ideas from? I mean, can we just picture you at this point in your life? Are you in your bedroom with a notebook, just kind of dreaming up hundreds of ideas?
Well, I lived with my parents, so I was definitely in my bedroom, and I was looking at things. And I think a lot of the work artists make in their 20s, especially men, is really to do about their adolescence and their childhood. And maybe women artists as well, but men trying to work out their adolescence and their interests as teenagers, which sort of extends, until about 25 with men, I would say. your adolescence and teenage years goes on for longer.
You actually did a show in the bedroom of your parents' house.
I did, and now when you could almost call it an exorcism of something by doing a show in the bedroom, but also in the house. And then maybe that was an attempt to sort of get rid of all this sort of teenage, youthful, childlike work in a sense, or contain it or show it and then leave it behind, maybe, I don't know. So I was at home, I was surrounded by objects and music and books. I went to go to jumble sales a lot. I reckon between 1985 and 1997 I went to probably 1,000 jumble sales, I'd say. Between 1 and 4 a week over that period of time.
And what were you sort of looking for there?
Yeah, well, you don't know what you're looking for. That's a brilliant thing about jumble sales. You just go. You have no idea what you're going to find. But you usually end up buying clothes, ties, books, records, and objects, kind of in that order. I've said this before. It's a bit like the internet. Jumble sales are a bit like the internet. It's where you went to find out about things in a very random way. Literature, music, how you looked, how things looked, history, sort of recent history basically was there to be unearthed.
And what did your parents feel about this kind of obsession?
Well, we were one of those classic English households where you don't talk about anything. So that was good, so I didn't have to talk about it. But they obviously probably quite worried.
And what did they make of your exhibition in your house?
Well, they didn't know about it for years to go because they were on holiday when it happened and they found out later.
So that was a kind of ultimate teenage rebellion.
It was. And it was... I didn't want to tell them because at that point, it was like 1993, there was really nothing going on in my life of note. You know, they couldn't tell their friends that I was doing this or that because I was doing nothing. So I had to be careful. So, you know, it was... For them, I'm sure it was quite stressful for them not knowing, you know, I had this education, done a master's, done a BA, and then what's he doing? Just like sitting around at home or cycling off in the morning. You don't know where he's going. He comes back in the evening or goes to art openings.
Bin liners full of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Or bringing back bin liners full of stuff. And then what's happening? So they were quite patient in a way, but probably they were quite worried. And I didn't really end until 1997 when I did something at the Queen Elizabeth Hall, the Acid Brass.
Which was when I think we first became aware of you, although when we only met when you proposed the Battle of Orgreave for the Archangel Open, which was probably about 1998
or 9. Maybe.
Soon after Acid Brass.
It would have been soon after, yeah.
Yeah.
And that had given me the confidence, working with a brass band had given me the confidence to work with people, basically, rather than make things. So that would have been an important moment for me. But my parents liked that work because it was full and it was in a building named after the Queen. So, I mean, it had everything going for it, really. And it was traditional and new and whatever.
So very unlike your proposal to restage the Battle of Orgreave.
Well, that came out of... That was an idea I'd had for years, but I was sitting on it. I mean, I'd made the print, the poster, but I was still sitting on it because I was waiting for the right
Did you,
moment.
when you generated these ideas, did you really think they would ever happen?
I thought that the Battle of Orgreave possibly could happen as an event. I thought the exhibitions should happen, but I didn't think... I could see how they could happen. I could have curated the exhibitions that I was interested in, but I didn't think I'd be in a position to do that. So, but I just thought that they were all possibilities, and that I could maybe make them happen or help them to make happen. Some were more possible than others. But I saw the value in all the things I was trying to make happen. And the Battle of Orgreave, definitely, I saw the value in that, but it was an event rather than an exhibition.
I think you put forward 3 proposals to the Archangel Open.
One was to put recording studios in old people's homes.
Yeah.
And another one was to have the whole transcript of a big drugs trial that was just about to happen, to transcribe it and then make it, and then put it into volumes and then make it into like a trashy novel, but the novel is just what these people are saying.
So were you putting forward proposals, one which you thought, well, maybe the people viewing these actually think, well, that could happen, and then you just threw in the Battle of Orgreave as a...
Well,
the English Civil War.
The English Civil War, as it was called.
Yeah.
I thought I threw that in as more of a challenge to Archangel, thinking, well, you know, you think you can do all these things, but like, look at this, see if you can do this. I didn't think you'd actually go for that one, so that was quite...
We were terrified by the proposal.
Yes.
Absolutely terrified. But it compelled You know, we took it seriously.
Yeah. Well, that's...
Well, I remember we sat on it overnight. You know,
We definitely sat.
we kind of saw you. We'd interviewed a number of artists and teams, and we had a group of people. I think it was Rachel Whiterew was with us and Brian Eno, and we kind of all went away having been sort of engaged, but not quite really knowing ourselves whether this could be possible. I think we came back the next morning and we sort of think, well, the thing that's the most difficult to do is going to be the most interesting thing to try and do. And that's when
I remember somebody around the table saying, but it could go Monty Python. It could really be absurd.
I might have said that even, because I knew there was an absurdity built into it, which is a danger, but also it's a sort of challenge in a way to overcome the humour, to recognise the humour and the absurdity, but then to sort of transcend it. But I remember the interview for it quite clearly. I remember Rachel Whiteread was quite hard on me because she just had experience in Vienna, or it was ongoing experience in Vienna. Maybe it happened by then, the Holocaust Memorial, and also House, which were two quite bruising experiences for her, and the Turner Prize and all that kind of stuff. So I think she was sort of concerned about it.
A lot of people saying, well, can you mess with recent history and such a kind of raw and unhealed wound in this way? But so, I mean, many people...
You always said that you weren't there to heal wounds.
No, I wasn't there to sort of...
That was actually very encouraging. The other thing that I found really encouraging was your forensic interest in piecing together what actually happened from police footage that hadn't been seen, the angles of cameras. I mean, it was a piece of forensic art.
Even though you don't necessarily see it in the film itself, there's transcripts of what was happening from the police side that were made for the trial. There was a trial and they had to transcribe all the audio from the film, and that was very helpful. And then everything was time-coded as well. And so that was probably the most helpful piece of information, and that came out of the transcripts of the trial, and a lawyer gave me that. Yes, it was a lot of work, obviously, but I was confident that it could be done in a way that would capture the former miners' imagination, and they would understand it.
We're very interested in how ideas are produced. So, you put down this thought on paper, and then the conversations began.
Yes.
Did you have, at that point, a visualization of what you wanted it to be?
Yeah, I had a visualization. So I had the idea and I had the visualization. It was just the middle bit, which was like making it happen.
A kind of a big reenactment.
Yes, so it was
the
a big
infrastructure that was necessary to make it happen.
Yes, so I could visualize it because it already happened. So you could just visualize it in those terms. The thing has already happened. So you're recreating something. So you know what it looks like.
Had you visited the village of Orgreave?
I don't know if I'd been there at that point. I don't think I had. I hadn't been there.
I mean, it's not. It was a sort of field, really, and it didn't feel like a village. It felt like a kind of.
Well, there was a village. The field itself was being. It was an open cast mine at that point, but it was being landscaped to become a park. The village more or less hadn't changed, but that was the second half of the reenactment. Yeah. Most people would remember from the news the first part because that's what was filmed. The second part wasn't really filmed. There's a bit of amateur footage, amazing amateur footage. Someone running with a camcorder, basically, documenting it, and a few photographs. So that was the less known part. So, no, I hadn't been there, but it stuck in my mind as a child watching it on TV, and that's why I wanted to do it, basically.
I remember going back and forth to Barnsley and Rotherham with you, to Sheffield, and every time we went, you'd said that if anyone doubts that this is a good idea, we won't do it.
Yeah, or if there's a sort of... I mean, if one person thought it was a bad idea, I think I could handle that. And also it had to be a certain kind of person. If it's a sort of a local policeman or a local politician, then I don't care really. But I was more, it was the sort of mining community or the former miners that was...
Of course, at that point, there was no film. We were never going to make a film. We were making a piece of performance.
Yeah.
But we found we had to make a film in order to fund
pay for
the performance.
Yeah, which is fine. And I'm glad we made a film because otherwise... people they'd know about it, but it would just exist in people's memory, and it was quite good to have a film. You might as well if you're spending all that money. But the two went hand in hand.
But I think paying people was vital to get commitment and make it a sort of serious
Yeah, I think the miners would have probably not would have done it without being paid, but the reenactors definitely would have expected to be paid, because for them it wasn't personal. It was just an interesting thing, and it wasn't really. I don't think they really knew what they were getting themselves into, to be honest, which is fine. I was very interested in them and their world, the world of reenactment, and what that represents, and what they do, and why, and what it says about British history. But in a sense, they thought it was more of a film shoot than a sort of political piece of performance. But that's fine, because it was both.
I mean, the Battle of Orgreave was the first in a sort of series that you're still engaged with, that looks at conflict, looks at a war zone. I mean,
yes.
Orgreave was a war zone.
It was.
We're here because we're here. It looks at the First World War. It is what it is.
Yeah,
the bombed out car from Iraq is about war. I mean, could you talk a little bit about what makes you interested in conflict? Well, you're not a person that actually enjoys conflict.
No, I don't like confrontation. I don't like groups of men at all. Being around men, I don't really like that. Groups of men. But I'm interested in history, and so a lot of history is obviously based around battles and conflict and so on. But a lot of the work I make is about male violence and conflict, things I don't really like, and I suppose maybe I'm making it to understand it better, or as a sort of some sort of, I don't know why, I sort of subject myself to something that I'm not really at ease with. So I get criticised for that. That's one of the consistent questions, if not criticisms, of talks, is where are the women in your work? And often a lot of my work doesn't have women in it because it's about men and masculinity. But I've never really thought of it in those terms. I mean, it's just about what men do to each other or to societies often.
What is very interesting on the day, I remember you saying, I don't have a role anymore. I don't know, I don't need to be here.
Well, I didn't need to be here. And in a way, for some of it, I'd have preferred not to have been there. But I knew I just had to... by then, it had become something else, and I wouldn't say lost control of the project, but the project had its own momentum and life. And so it was going to happen whatever happened to me, which is fine. I suppose that's what film shoots are in a way.
Was that the case with We're Here Because We're Here, the First World War piece?
Well, yes, in a sense. You can't be all around the UK with that work, which is a national work that's happening everywhere. So there was really very little for me to do that day because I couldn't, apart from the odd interview later, but I couldn't go and see everything that was happening. I couldn't even intervene because then you'd break the work, as it were, by running up to someone and saying, don't do that, do this. So you can't be a control freak when it's thousands of people all over Britain doing something. You can be before, but once it happens, there's nothing really left to do.
I mean, one of my recollections of the day of the reenactment in Orgreave was that the first part, as you say, in this field, which was more film, was quite reasonably well orchestrated.
Yeah.
Because you got this reenactment specialist, and there had been a little bit of preparation training.
We had a rehearsal, basically.
And people kitted out in the uniform. So that kind of had its sort of form, and it was explained to the audience as people gathered on the field. And then the second part, and I don't know where you were then, but I know where I was, which was sort of along one of the streets where these hundreds of the mining section were kind of running back, and it was mayhem. And I thought, this isn't a reenactment now. This is a riot.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
Where were you then?
I was actually part of the riot then, because the first half, as you say, was quite stagey and quite staged and traditional in terms of reenactment, how it looks and sounds. And I'd walked away from it because I was too stressed, and I probably wasn't happy with it for whatever reason. And I just thought, I've got to get away from here. And then the second half, there's a break, and the second half, I joined the reenactment. I was one of the miners, as it were, because that way I knew no one could talk to me because I'd be in it. And so it'd be a good way to hide, weirdly, was to be doing it. And so I just did that. And of course, the reason why the second half was so chaotic was we hadn't had time to rehearse it on the day before. So no one really knew what was going on. So it was more like what a real riot would be like without communication.
Because the kind of, as it were, the boundary, if you like, between the performers and the viewers became increasingly blurred.
Yeah, it did.
I don't think it could have been rehearsed, actually. It needed to just happen.
Yes, it wasn't like a traditional battle. It was a rout and it was a riot. And so it was. It had its own life, and then mistakes were made. Some police at one point turned up at the wrong part in the middle of all the miners, so they got attacked, this small group, and all this. It was very dramatic. But having said that, it was totally weirdly inaccurate, I think, is what really happened. Or not massively, but it wasn't really what had happened. But that didn't, in a way, that didn't matter. The fact that it was happening was I felt was what was important. But it was there, and people were watching. And there's an audience, there's a live audience. That was really important.
I mean, I'm intrigued to know for both of you, because Michael was really the active producer, your kind of producing partner on this, what each of your biggest anxieties were about during the whole process, which was, a couple of years?
Well, it's always, if you work in Britain and you work outside, it's the weather, because the weather the day before had been dreadful. It was the middle of summer. It was like June 17th, 16th, and it was very cold, very windy and wet the day before. The day of it wasn't much better, but it's that. And then also that it just wouldn't be convincing, and it would be a joke. So that's about the tone, and so you had to protect that. But of course there was, within that, there were things that you couldn't control about how people behaved and so on.
My real anxiety was how the reenactors and the former miners would actually work together, how they would gel, how they would merge. And of course they couldn't really, because emotion was very real for the former miners. And for the reenactors, they were just doing what they normally do.
Just another battle.
Another battle, but with contemporary clothing, and a battle in which nobody died.
Yeah.
Actually, if someone had died in Orgreave, we wouldn't have been able to do the piece.
I think it would have been very different, very difficult to do it.
Very
so
difficult.
yes, it was a battle within living memory where they're wearing police uniforms. Some of them are dressed as miners. So it was obviously very different for them, but it was also. They're being paid, and it was an interesting thing, and it was a film, so it had all these other attractions for them. But of course, it was, for me, I was as interested in them really as I was in the miners, or the former miners, but also about these two worlds coming together.
Yeah, and the night before in the reenactors' tent, the night before the battle, was quite extraordinary.
I wasn't there. You should explain what happened.
Well, it was the night before a battle reenactment. The reenactors all drink beer in a tent. And there was a kind of concern that sort of a rumour went round the site that there could be some real tension between the former miners and the reenactment societies. And that was dispelled, I think, by a really wonderful guy who made a speech, which is in the film.
Oh, yes. Oh.
The ambulance driver.
What's his name? I can't remember his name now.
No.
But yeah, he was the voice of reason.
He was really great. He just basically said, this is a reenactment. It's not to settle old scores, and he just very gently kind of made people feel contained.
Yeah, but I think it would have been fine anyway. I think the former miners knew what their role was. They knew what they had to do, and they knew their limits and how far they would go. And after that meeting, we had to sort of mix up reenactors and miners a bit more, so it wasn't reenactors versus miners, which it wasn't anyway. But it became even more porous in a way, that relationship. But it was ironic that the reenactors were threatening to go on strike at the reenactment of a battle from a strike.
Yes.
And I quite like that. But I think what's occurred to me in watching the film, and actually, is that the reenactors were just totally intimidated by the camaraderie of these former miners all meeting up for the first time in years. Some of them have not seen each other for years.
And been back to the field.
And they're in the field, and they're back there, and they're just together, and they have this sort of rapport with each other and this sort of love for each other. And I think the reenactors had never seen that before, and it was totally intimidating. And even though the former miners were massively outnumbered by the reenactors, like 2-1 or 3-1 even, that energy and that sort of friendship and bonds between them really frightened the reenactors, I think.
I remember the presence of some of the miners' sons who were babies when the actual original confrontation took place. And they'd heard about Orgreave all their lives. And actually it was very moving to see them actually within the reenactment as miners.
With their dads.
With their dads. It was very moving. I mean, one of the things that you have often said is that you have a sort of emotional detachment from some of your work. Your work is very emotional. I mean, we're here because we're here was very, very moving. Yet there's something in the preparation where you're very passionate and engaged, but when the actual event is unfolding, there is a kind of emotional disengagement, which I think serves you quite well.
Well, otherwise you'd just like have a heart attack within 10 minutes. You'd be just so involved. And you can't do that. And in a way, your work is done by then. It's sort of over, the preparation and the processes. That's where the hard work is. Also, I'm observing the public's reaction. That's really interesting.
Yes.
And so that for me is interesting. And so that's the experiment of the work is what happens when it goes into the real world and it's exposed to the public.
So you want to be there still, but at that point you don't want to be identified. Really.
No, you want to be in the background, but also I'd be quite happy not seeing a lot of things and just, when the car went around America, for example, that was destroyed in a bomb attack in Iraq, initially I thought, I don't have to go on this, I can just send it out there. That was because I was worried for myself and my personal safety. But in the end, I did go out there. I'm glad I did. But I think...
Let's just talk about this as an idea too. So what was the kernel of the idea? Was it
with
the car?
It is what it is. Initially, I was asked to suggest an idea for the fourth plinth, and I'd suggested getting a car that had been destroyed in a sectarian attack in Iraq after the invasion. It was basically another civil war situation, effectively, and plonking it on the fourth plinth and watching it decay over a 2-year period and just rust and be disgusting, basically. And so I thought that was a good way of bringing something from a war into the heart.
And had you imagined that it would be a rallying point for different views?
Well, this is the thing, I was worried. The only worry I had about the work is, and it's quite a big one, but it could become a flashpoint for violence, maybe, pro and anti, or even terrorism. I just didn't know what would happen if they're on there, but I sort of, up to a point, I trusted the public to come and see this thing and see, these things exist in museums, but it was a live, ongoing conflict. It wasn't a historical conflict. It was actually happening. And it was shortlisted, but it didn't happen. But I'm not surprised, and maybe I was a bit relieved, but I just getting a car from there was going to be difficult. But in the end, I did get a car in a very straightforward way that had been in Iraq and destroyed in a bomb attack, and I towed it across America, basically, with a American soldier, an Iraqi citizen, in tow with a few other people, curator, and we just stopped in places and almost not randomly, it was all very well planned, but most people didn't know they were going to see a blown up car from Iraq that day when they went to work or went to the shops or whatever, and so they did, and then they did. The bomb wasn't in the car. The car was destroyed by a bomb. That's a very important sort of point to make. It wasn't a weapon. It was a victim. So, and it was just an amazing sort of 3 weeks going through the Deep South and very right-wing Republican areas we chose to go to difficult places.
That sounds more scary.
Well, it was actually. The first day, as soon as we started, the soldier and the civilian, both of them had been in life-threatening situations, were very worried and looked very worried, which made me think, well, if they're worried, this is an armed country, effectively, especially the areas we were going. But we had no real problems with the public. I mean, people didn't like it. A few people told us, but most people were intrigued by it.
And what then happens when the piece becomes an object in a museum, as it did?
Well, it began as an object in a museum, in the new museum, and that was how it got to go on the tour, because it was meant to be, I had a commission to make an artwork that would go to 3 different museums, and I suggested this and some other things around it. So it began in a museum, which for me was not ideal, and I wasn't particularly happy about it being in a museum for a number of reasons, because it sort of drains the meaning out of it, weirdly, in a contemporary art museum. And people probably didn't think it was real, or people look at it and think, oh, that's very pretty, because it's in a museum and it's in this pristine space. So in a way, it wasn't the best place for it to be. It had to be out and about, really. So that for me was... And then after New York, this exhibition with other artists was going to LA. So I thought, well, that's the classic road trip, isn't it? It's not quite Route 66, but it's the road trip New York to LA.
But it's also a little bit like, it's a relic of a war being dragged around, and that makes me think about reliquaries. And
yes.
touring of religious artifacts.
It's like a true... It's like a pilgrimage in a sense. It's part of the cross or the nail from the crucifixion, but going on tour, taken into a town. People look at it, then it goes to the next place. Or a band on tour, or circus, or medicine show, whatever it is. All these things where you turn up somewhere, you do your show, you get back in the vehicle, whatever, and then you go to the next place. So it was in that tradition.
In that tradition, but not really knowing who the believers were.
No, and who you're going to meet. You have no idea. You're on the streets. You're not in a tent. You're literally in the open air. And we realised very quickly you had to make a flyer after the first day because people weren't, not even Americans wanted to come and talk to you about it in the way they seemed to be very open and friendly and chatty. So we had to give out a flyer saying, this is a car, it was here, we are here, blah, blah, blah. Very bland, uninspiring sort of language almost. And this is what we're doing. And we're happy to talk about it. And people looked at it, and that was very helpful.
There's recent work which is overtly religious, the Murdoch's piece, Father and Son, which I mean didn't get a lot of publicity here, although there's a great chapter in your book. And that was a piece that you didn't experience yourself.
No, it was a life-size, realistic depiction of Lachlan and Rupert Murdoch in this. Rupert sitting and Lachlan standing behind him with his hands on him in wax, life-size, and it was burnt slowly over a period of 12 hours, almost like a vigil.
In a church?
Yeah, in a former church in Melbourne, which is the seat of power, really. That's where it all began for the family in terms of newspapers. And we burnt it, and the public could go and look at it. It was unannounced in terms of what the content was, as was a lot of things I do are more or less unannounced. Not even that.
If you announce it, then expectations are built up, which are either met or not met.
Well, there's that, but also with something like that,
it's dangerous.
It actually could.
It would have been stopped.
Yeah, it might not have happened, and there were times when it wasn't going to happen, and there were problems with all sorts of things. So we had to do it slightly under the radar because they're very powerful in Australia. That family, and they're very powerful in Melbourne. Like I said, it's their seat of power. So you don't want to engage with them first, really. I just can't be bothered. And so we just made it something that happened. So it was a very small event, really, for what it was. People just turned up not knowing what it was to see it.
It's kind of interesting that it strikes both James and I, we talked about this, is that your work is about heroes and anti-heroes. There's a lot of heroes.
Yeah.
And a lot of anti-heroes, whether it's Nigel Farage or the Murdochs or Abramovich, and there's Neil Young and there's Iggy Pop and
there's music versus
Bruce Lacey,
right-wing politics, I suppose.
Well, that's probably interesting because it sounds like with the heroes you're really identifying with an individual who was very meaningful for you, probably particularly in your formative years. With Bowie or Iggy Pop or
movements and so on. Yeah.
With the anti-heroes, they're more symbolic,
in a sense,
of a system.
And definitely the father and son. That was a symbolic act as well, burning them and watching them sort of melt. It was almost say you're contemplating their souls as they melt in front of you, and you have to almost for you to feel some kind of empathy for them or sympathy for them for what they've done to themselves and the world. And you could see it like that. I tend to make work about things I either really like or really don't like. It's good to have a channel for it. I don't play sport or doing boxing.
You're one of the most even-tempered people I think we've ever worked with.
I think so. I'm not a shouter, definitely, when it comes to work.
Your anger is very sort of maybe sublimated into the work.
Yeah.
Because I've never known a less angry person.
Well, not outwardly. I'm trying to be quite calm doing things. I don't shout and rave, and I don't really like that anyway.
It never really produces good results. If someone had shouted at the miners, I don't think it would have had the right effect. Mrs. Thatcher already shouted at the miners.
Yeah, I mean, no one wants that. No one likes to have that happen to them, do they?
No.
There's other ways of convincing people to do things or getting away than screaming and shouting at people.
You tend to do it by being the same with everybody.
I try to be reasonable and persuasive and use my sort of powers of persuasion.
But it's never aggressive.
No, it can't be really. Not when you're 5'4", you can't, or whatever it is I am, however tall it is I am. You can't be aggressive. You can be intellectually forceful, I suppose, or certain about what you do, you can't be physically aggressive. There's no point, or shouting. That shows a loss of power, doesn't it? A loss of something.
Well,
but
just coming back to another project, a really profoundly serious project, was your response to an invitation to make a memorial for the first day of the Battle of the Somme.
Yeah.
I mean, that is, you can hardly get something of greater gravity within British history
No.
in the last 100 years. And you decided to approach that again through the material of bodies, and in this case, teenagers, right? Mainly.
More or less.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a lot of very young people,
Young
so it was a
people.
reenactment.
Young men.
It wasn't a reenactment as such. It was, I should explain it, it was the 100th anniversary of the first day of the Battle of the Somme. It's a bit of a mouthful, when like 19,000 British soldiers were killed in one day. It's the worst day ever in the history of the British Army. And it was, my idea was to have people in very accurate uniform, just more or less appear around the UK and then travel around the UK and all over the UK. So they'd be all over, on trains, and then they'd be at stations, and then they'd just hang out in contemporary Britain, not heritage Britain. And so you have to recruit a lot of people. Again, we weren't telling anyone what was happening. They were recruited almost in secret and then rehearsed in secret. But there were a lot of very young people, like students, people at universities and colleges and drama groups and so on.
What was extraordinary about it is that for however you did it, and it may have been Rufus Norris as well as you doing this, they didn't act.
No, that was the thing.
They were just there.
They were just sort of hanging out in Britain, in contemporary Britain, and they weren't acting.
And they did. Am I right in thinking that one of the instructions was that, when people approached them, what did they do?
They were silent.
Right.
They sang a song at some point, which was a way to sort of rally them together, almost to say we're off to the next stop. It was a kind of good way to communicate without having to speak. But they were silent. They had cards on when they were representing someone who had died, and the cards was like a little gravestone, effectively.
I think that sort of the muteness
Yes.
of the project was very important.
Well,
memorials are mute; they don't speak.
They are,
People speak on behalf of them.
Exactly, and as soon as you start speaking, you have to sort of describe life in the trenches. You become a reenactor, and it wasn't that, and it wasn't acting, and it wasn't reenacting. So for a lot of the people found that quite difficult because they were young drama students to be told you're not acting. That was probably the biggest hurdle, was to sort of de-act them or get that out of their system and just say, look, there's no acting required for this, but it's durational and it's quite demanding what you're going to have to do because you're on stage effectively in Britain for 10 hours. You'll be walking around. Some of them walked so far. They walked into London along the North Circular and so on, all through Wembley and everything, being seen by thousands and thousands of people in their cars. And so some of them had a really amazing day, actually. They had breaks and stuff, but it was very well organised by the National Theatre and all the other theatres. It was amazing.
The moment of being handed the card, it was the only moment of communication with the public. This is who I was. And actually you read the card and it was incredibly upsetting.
Yeah. See, for me, I was totally just watching and just seeing. By then, the emotion of it had left me months previously. I was just intrigued by the reaction. We were actually expecting to get into difficult situations with people who didn't like the idea of the army on the streets, especially in Northern Ireland or anywhere really. People who were drunk or whatever, or thought they could abuse them in some way, but it didn't happen.
But that's why the uniforms were so important, because the uniforms were of the past.
Yeah. Yes, but still, people don't see that necessarily. They don't look at the badges and realise, this regiment doesn't exist anymore. They do look, they did look like soldiers. They didn't have guns or anything. They did look a bit old-fashioned. But it was a week after the Brexit vote, so Britain was in a very febrile atmosphere as it was, and so people were really on edge. And I think generally the country was in a very unhappy place. And
I think that was also why it was emotional, because we were mourning something else.
We were mourning that, and then also we were understanding what does sacrifice and patriotism, what does it really mean? We just seen politicians sacrificing their country effectively for their careers, And now we were watching people who'd sacrificed their lives for their country, and I think it couldn't have been more clear for some people. And so there were a lot of tears, which we weren't expecting. We trained everyone up to, if there's a drunk who takes your hat, your cap from you, or tries to sort of engage with you, what do you do? But we didn't have, what happens if a commuter starts crying in front of you? We didn't really know what to react to that. But having said that, they were just mute, which was really good, actually. It was great.
The first major works, works involving a lot of people, were really before, our world of communicating ideas changed radically. At this point, you didn't need to publicise anything.
No, I mean, it was
was this consciously designed as a work of a memorial for the age of social media?
Well, it was a viral artwork in two ways. One is all these bodies travelling around Britain, literally travelling around, getting on trains and buses and being at stations and transport interchanges and so on. And then it was a viral artwork through Twitter and Instagram.
You didn't declare authorship of it until the end of the day, I think.
Yeah, until 7 o'clock we announced what it was.
So it was very well planned. The way it unfolded online was incredibly important.
Yeah, but I think it was doing it anyway because people just... If anything interesting happens now in the world, first thing you do is take a photograph of it, and that's what people did. So it was filmed and documented. The public documented it effectively, which is great.
The public publicised it.
Yeah, they did all the work, a lot of the work for us.
Yeah. Just got one sort of final question. I mean, do you think that your work, the way you work, has changed? Your approach to the work has changed over the last 25 years, or is it still? You're still true to the way you've always worked?
I hope it's the same. I mean, especially as you get older, you have less energy to do things, but I think it's more or less the same. I'd like to think it's more or less the same. The interests will never go away, they'll be the same. But, I'm not a participant in the way I may have been when I was 25 in music and that world, but I still know a bit about it and follow it a bit. But I wouldn't try and make work now that maybe I was making then, because I'm not in that world.
Have you got ideas in your memory bank from quite a long time ago that you're still sort of biding your time to make happen?
There's a book called Big Ideas.
Well, a book in your own...
It's a notebook.
Your notebook, okay.
And each page is an idea.
How many pages are there?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, there's more pages than there are ideas. But ideally, there'd be 100 ideas, but there aren't. There's probably about 20. But I'd have to go and look.
And you started the book a while ago.
Well, they come and go, really, the ideas. But there's always being refined. So there's probably 20 or so that I would be interested in. But I can't tell you what they are now. I probably shouldn't tell you, even if I could remember. But there are ideas, and they're all quite simple in a way, but very difficult. The Battle of Orgreave is a very simple idea to understand, but very incredibly difficult to do in organisational terms.
I think that's probably the case with quite a lot of the projects that we were attracted to.
Yeah.
You can describe them in one sentence, but they're really hard to pull off.
Yeah, and the public understand it. You don't have to have read that essay by that theoretician.
It's not like they're about something, it's they are something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, so that's the thing. Getting the idea, I wouldn't say it's easy, but the idea is easier than actually making things happen. That's the 3 years, 4 years of preparation, isn't it, and work.
The difference now with the ideas that you write down currently and the ideas that you printed up in the LCP, you could actually do most of what you wanted to do now if you had the energy and the time and the connections. You could make those things happen.
Some of them, yes, definitely. I'm thinking
you probably couldn't have done then.
No, which is probably why I was out of frustration. I was throwing out these ideas to the public, saying, "Look, do this. This could happen. Yeah. Why don't we do this?" Now it's probably it's the opportunities are more available for me, but also for everyone else. I think because people are more interested in making work that isn't just in a museum or static.
So you're right not to list them now because people will hear them.
Yeah,
take you.
Yeah, they're very straightforward as well. It could easily be like the inflatable Stonehenge. That's the idea. That's a very easy.
Yes.
It doesn't take a genius to make that, or even to have the idea. But it's something I had to sort of sit on a bit because I just thought, God, this really should happen at some point. And I was luckily the first person to do it. So anyone could have made that.
Well, long may the ideas continue.
Well, thank you. I agree. I agree.
Is Where We Meet is devised by James Lingwood and Michael Morris, co-directors of Art Angel from 1991 to 2023. The theme is composed by PJ Harvey. Millie Roberts is the production manager, and Matteo Pini is the editor. Nell Whitaker, Sorab Golsorki-Ainsley, and Thomas Ruche are executive producers. Otomi Larcher is the graphic designer, and Stephen Lewin is the audio engineer. Here Is Where We Meet is an original podcast by Tank and is available on all good podcast platforms. The series is dedicated to the memory of John Berger, from whose book of imaginary conversations its title is taken.